Well, folks, I have an amazing guest today. I have Leigh Barborek. She is a longtime listener of the show, but she is going to share how she took her very first solo trip. And even she did an international one, which is even more exciting to hear about because that is a big leap of faith to take that if you've never gone solo travel before. So, Leigh, I'm so glad you're here. And I would love to actually hear kind of an origin story of really what made you desire to take a solo trip.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I love your show, so this is really neat to actually be a guest on it.
Yes.
Um, well, I always wanted to take a trip by myself. I don't really know why, other than there's not always somebody to go with you, and so I just felt like I wish I was brave enough, to do
Mm,
it because I would see other people doing it, and I guess I would go to all the bad things that could happen. And that would sort of scare me away.
well, let's talk about those bad feelings because I know that's you're not alone in that. A lot of people, I think sometimes that's what prevents them from actually going on a solo trip. But you somehow were able to overcome those bad ideas or feelings that you were having. What were some of them that you had to overcome?
Well, just feeling like you don't have somebody with you is, are you going to be safe?
Hmm.
How's it going to be eating out at a restaurant by yourself? And, um, you know, going to somewhere that you've never been before, is that, is it going to be like you think it is? You know?
Right. Yeah. We all have these built up expectations, a lot of, when we travel or any kind of event. And well, just out of curiosity, did your expectations, did they get met by going where you went?
They did get mad. I
Okay.
think what I mean by that is you watch it like, one way that I get ready to go somewhere is I'll watch YouTube videos, and sometimes those can be deceiving.
Mhm.
So, I was worried that I would choose an area and then I would get there and you spend all this money and you make all these plans and you get your time off work, and then you get there and it's not what you thought it was gonna be? So, I think I had a fear of that for sure.
Mhm. Okay.
Even though where I ended up going is well known to be very beautiful, it's a big place, and there's lots of places to choose from once you get there.
Yes.
So, I was scared I would pick the wrong place.
Well, how did you decide where to go? And then you can tell everybody where you went, first of
Well,
all.
I went to New Zealand, and I think a lot of people wanna go to New Zealand. It sounds kind of exotic. And we know there's beaches there and mountains there and just beautiful scenery and landscape. And lots of movies are filmed there. And so people have an
Right.
expectation of what it's going to be like. And so everyone, I mean, a lot of people want to go there. And I am signed up to these websites that will send you alerts when there are cheap airfares, to certain
Yes.
destinations. I know you know what I'm talking about. So one day I happened to get an alert that there was one to New Zealand, and I thought, wow, it was a really good deal. And I mulled it over and I went and talked to my husband about it, and just really for the 2 of us to go. And he said, "I don't really think I can get off work then." And so I thought, "Okay, well, then this will be my chance to go by myself somewhere." So I presented that idea to him. He was not super on board at first, not 100% against it, but also not real excited about that idea. But I did some convincing and presented why I thought this would be a good trip to go on solo. And finally, he was on board with it, and I took the plunge and booked the trip.
That's amazing. Yes, as often we will get, pushback from family members or friends about even taking a solo trip. So I love how you presented your case to him, basically. I mean, like, that's amazing. So,
Well, I have a job that can sometimes put me in danger, and I brought that up to him, and I said, "I do this every day. You never really, say anything about it. I think sometimes my job can put me in more danger than flying to New Zealand by myself." So, that's what finally convinced him to let me try this.
there you go. Yes. And you booked your trip. How long were you gone, and where? Tell us a little bit more about what you did when you were there, I guess, you know?
Well, I will say that I put off the planning of the trip. I booked the airfare.
Mhm.
Um, when I finally decided to take the leap, I booked the airfare. And then I just sort of put the planning on the back burner because, life gets in the way. I have two kids, I have a job, and I almost sort of, I won't say I was in denial about it coming up, but it wasn't in the front of my mind,
Yeah.
And so finally I realized, I'm leaving in a month and a half and I still have no accommodations. So that's when I really started, watching videos. I do this thing when I'm trip planning that in the morning when I'm getting ready for work, I'll put a YouTube video on of the place that I'm going to. I'll find one that looks, like it might be informative and I'll watch that while I'm getting ready. And that I found this place called Cathedral Cove and it sounded really
Yeah.
neat place. And some people may know it from there was a scene from the Chronicles of Narnia where the kids get sort of dropped off into Cathedral Cove and they start playing on the beach. That's where that is. And it
Oh, see, I didn't even know that. See?
and it just looked really neat and so I was like, well, where is that? And it happened to be in the North Island. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll try to find that. So the trip started being planned around Cathedral Cove. And
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
actually located in a place called the Coromandel Peninsula, which is in the northeastern part of the North Island of New Zealand. And there's so much to do around there. I thought, you know what? I'm going to have a rental car. They drive on the opposite side of the road up there. I'm not real, excited about driving a lot. So I thought I'm just going to get to my destination and sort of stay in that area because there's enough to do on the Coromandel Peninsula to keep me there the whole time. And I thought I'll come back to New Zealand another time and explore the South Island with my husband.
Great plan. Well, and most of the places, I'm sure other people that travel a lot can attest, like, when you go somewhere, you go to a country, you get to see such a little slice of it, and there's so much to see no matter where you go, honestly, and you can't see it all, and so I love the attitude of, like, "I'll have to just come back," right?
I'll
So
just,
there's
that'll just
yeah.
give me another reason to come back.
Exactly, something to look forward to. So I
Yeah.
love how, you play. I've done the same thing. You book your flight and then figure everything out kinda after that, and I had that as actually a question somebody had asked, "How do you do that?" And, well, that's how I start the same way. I book the airline because usually I'm the same way. I'm looking for a deal, and I'm
Mhm.
sure when you found that deal, I did see a lot of New Zealand deals going around at that
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
So I understand, I know why you did it and kind of, that's amazing that you took that leap. Um, Before you went though, what were some of the feelings that you were having before you went?
Well, I had a few different feelings. I had a little bit of guilt about
Oh,
taking the trip and sort of,
interesting.
the financial aspect of it because, you're spending money on this trip. Even though I got a great deal, I still had to pay for accommodations. I still had to pay for food and, whatever, expenditures
Mhm.
you have on a trip. And we had just had to buy a new car because, my husband and I drive cars until they're done, you know, and both of us had cars that neither one would be reliable for an out of town trip. So we had
Yeah.
just purchased a new car and I thought, oh, I don't really need to spend this money. And So I did have a little bit of guilt.
Mm, mm.
And in the back of my mind too, it was that I could cancel that ticket and I could cancel my accommodations because whenever I book anything, and this is a good tip for your listeners, make sure you can cancel, up to the last minute because you just don't ever know what's going to happen. But I had that in the back of my mind too, I could cancel but I also had in my mind, well, I've told people I'm going on this trip and I can't bear to say, oh, I decided not to go.
Yeah.
And
That
I
would be
wanted,
disappointing.
yeah,
Disappointing for you and maybe
yes,
others, right? Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So I wanted to go. So, I tried to fight through that and justify and work a few extra hours, to
Yeah.
get some spending money. And then I also I felt very anxious about driving on the opposite side of the road. Um, it's so against everything you've ever done, especially when you're over 50. I'm 54. I've been driving a car for a
Well,
long
yeah.
time on the right side of the road. So to think about, not only am I in charge of everything and all the details, but I'm also in charge of driving this car in a foreign country,
Mhm.
and it's going to be different than what I've always done. And so I have a friend who lived in Australia for a few years, and she tried to talk me through this fear and anxiety I was having, but
Oh,
she was
nice.
actually making it worse.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Because no, actually she probably saved my life by giving me this advice, but what I didn't realize is that you're not just on the other side of the road, but you're on the other side of the car.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah.
and I never really thought about that, and when she brought that up to me, I was like, "Oh, whew," and it just adds another element of, confusion and, I don't know, fear to the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And also I'm landing in a city of 1.7 million people, so it's not like I'm driving in
Wow.
a small town. I flew into Auckland.
Okay, yeah.
I had to pick the car up at the rental car, at the airport, and then drive it from there into I was staying in Auckland the first night. And so I knew I had to get from the airport to my hotel. And it was a little dicey, what is so odd is to make a right-hand turn, but you're not turning, on the right-hand side. You have
Yeah.
to pass by that lane.
Yes.
Yes. That was very difficult for me, that
Oh,
concept.
yeah.
But once I got the car parked, I was so proud of myself,
There you
and
go, see?
yes,
Yes.
I was alive and everyone that I had encountered was still alive. And, I stayed in that hotel for the night, and then the next day, I knew if I could just get to the interstate, that I would be okay because then everybody's moving the same direction,
Yes. Yeah.
you don't have anyone coming at you.
Correct.
And
Yes.
so I was able to drive on the interstate for quite a while and then off onto a two-lane road, and once I sort of got to the Airbnb, then I felt very accomplished, and I thought, "You can do this, you just cannot let your guard down." You can't get comfortable at all. You have to be thinking at all times.
I think that's amazing. It's definitely, something about even just doing a solo trip. You kind of build that confidence. You have to do things that you're not accustomed to, you're uncomfortable doing, and that is a huge one that you overcame. So I
Yeah.
love it. I've been there as we
Mhm.
discussed earlier, and I kept having to say, what is it? Left, left, left. Like
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
remind myself I'm on this side of the road, not this side.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
just of course, when I got my rental car, that you have a choice to do automatic or manual. Well, there
Yes.
was no way. I mean, I know how to drive a manual, but there's no way I'm doing manual with my left hand. Just like,
Yes.
there's just no
I
way.
know, I thought the same thing. It's gonna be hard enough just to drive an
Correct.
automatic transmission on the left side of the road, so
Right.
let's take that factor out of it.
Correct. Enough to think about, like you said, to have to, drive on the other side, thinking about how you're turning differently, because
Yes.
of where you are on the road. But yes, good for you. Yes, that's That's a huge one. It can be
It
scary, but
was.
gosh, I feel like if you could do that, and if you can navigate um public transportation in like a big city that's not your like maybe not your own country, right? That
Yeah.
you can tackle anything really.
Yeah,
So,
that's also a big win. Yes.
yes.
Learning the train station, bus,
Mhm.
bus terminal, all the scheduling and how to buy a ticket and
Correct. Yeah, that's a
those
huge deal.
things. Yeah.
So New Zealand, how long were you there?
I was there for 9 days, start
Okay.
to finish, and I did stay in besides the first night in Auckland, I stayed in 3 separate towns along the peninsula, so I just sort of split it up by really what was available because
Okay.
it's their summertime,
Yes.
our seasons are flip-flopped because they're in the Southern Hemisphere, and
Correct.
it's their summertime, and of course, like I said, I had waited a little probably too long to book my accommodation, so I was limited on what was left, and I had to so I split it up, a few days here, a few days
Yeah.
there
Good.
based on what was available, which I'm glad I did because I got to see more that way.
Yes. Yeah. What would you recommend for, say, somebody else going to New Zealand for the first time, for something for them to do?
Well, what I will say is, some of the things I read before I left were that if you're going to drive a car in New Zealand, um, don't underestimate the amount of time it will take you to get from point A to point B because, at least in this country, we're used to good, straight, you know, paved roads.
Yes. Yeah.
And, that's not the case in New Zealand. The roads were fine, but not at all straight. And they will even warn you. In fact, the guy warned me at the rental car company. He said, make sure you give yourself enough time because even though you see 30 kilometers written, from this place to this place, it's going to take you a lot longer than you think it will. And it was so true. So to make sure that you plan, and I
Okay.
guess to answer your question, when I first started thinking about going, I was thinking, well, I want to see the North Island and the South Island. And then as I got closer to it and I started reading that about how long it takes you to
Hmm.
get from point A to point B, I thought, I don't want to spend all my time driving.
Driving. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I will say my advice is to pick one of the islands and stay there. And then maybe the next time you go back, explore the other island. Because unless you have a lot of time there, if you have more than 2 weeks, then you could probably, see a lot of both islands.
Yeah.
But I only had 9 days, and part of that was my travel
Travel
time.
days. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Because
I
from
just
the
thought, yeah, there's enough to see in the North Island. And also, they're two different landscapes. The North Island is more beaches, and what they call forests. There are mountains there, but not like there are in the South Island. The South Island is more, they have the highest point in New Zealand, which I think is Mount Cook. And then they also have, fjords and glaciers and
yes.
lots of rock climbing and hiking, a lot more sort of adventure stuff, where the North Island is nice, long stretches of white sand beaches.
Okay. That's good to know. Yeah.
Mhm.
So they have different landscapes. I love that.
Yes. And I'm a walker, for my like for exercise, I like to walk. And in New Zealand, they don't call it hiking, they call it walking. So they don't say they have a hiking trail, they say they have a walk. They
Walking
have a
trails.
walk. Yeah.
Okay.
Or they call it tramping. You'll hear both of those.
Tramping. Oh, I
You'll hear
like that.
you'll hear both of those terms.
I
And
like
so
that.
there was so many trails in that area of the Coromandel Peninsula that were coastal. You could just walk along the coastline and they may be up on a cliffside, but you can hear the water, you can see the water, and it was just beautiful. Right up my alley. That's what I
Oh
want to
gosh, that
see
sounds
the water
perfect.
and I want to hike. So it was a
Uh,
perfect place to do both those things.
and did you realize that before you booked your trip to New Zealand that this was activities that you could do that you enjoyed were going to be available in New Zealand?
I think I had an idea of it, but I did not know all of that about the differences in the 2 islands. I really had to study that, when I
Mhm.
was trying to determine, where it was that I was gonna go, because I just knew I didn't wanna move around a whole lot. A lot of people who had been to the South Island said, "Oh, you should have seen the South Island," and I just thought, I'm sure that it's beautiful and I want to go back and check that out, but I did not want to spend a whole bunch of time, traveling from one place to another. And I'm glad I did it the way I
Yeah,
did, because I felt like I got to experience a lot of the North Island. And
that's
also
smart.
it was warmer in the North Island. That's a different concept for us
Oh,
who
yeah.
live in the Northern Hemisphere. The South Island is colder than the
Well,
North
that
Island.
kind of makes sense if you think about where the equator is, right?
Yeah.
So we just have to remember exactly.
Yes, and they were having a cool summer. It never got out of the 70s when I was there.
Oh, that sounds perfect.
It was perfect, and I was talking to there was a family on the beach one day, and the man he had seen a stingray in the water, and
Mm.
so they wanted to alert me to that, so
Yeah.
they called me over and they were showing it to me, and so then he asked where I was from, and we just struck up a conversation. But I said, "Isn't it your summertime?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "It doesn't get over 70 degrees during the day." And he said, "Well, this is a very mild summer for us. Usually it does, but that summer in particular was super nice." So I definitely chose the right time to go.
Yeah, you got lucky.
I
Yes.
did get lucky, and also it never rained while I was there. I couldn't believe it.
Oh my goodness.
I was so lucky.
Oh, that sounds amazing. While you were there, did you have any, I call them serendipitous or unexpected experiences that happened that you'd like to
Well,
share?
yes, actually, one of the videos that I watched before I went over, was of a place called Donut Island, and that's not the traditional New Zealand word for it, but that's the
Oh,
nickname that it's gotten. But
okay.
I can't pronounce the Maori word for this place, but if you just Google Donut Island, you'll see it. And I had watched it, probably at least a month before I left. So I had, oh, that was so cool. Maybe I should try to do that when I'm there. And then I sort of forgot about it.
Uh-huh.
Well, then when I was there, I remembered it. And I thought, well, I wonder where that is. So I Googled it, and it happened to be in the town where I was staying.
Oh my
That's,
gosh. Yes, that's
yes,
amazing.
so I thought, okay, I've got to do it. And what it
Meant to
is,
be.
it's meant to be. It's a volcano that has collapsed into the water. And so you're left with just sort of the rim of the volcano, and it's open at the top. So
Oh,
there's a cave opening that you would paddle your kayak into. And then you're
wow.
inside this beautiful turquoise lagoon with, I know, and there's the trees are growing around the edge of the volcano, and the sunlight is coming through the top, and it's just amazing. But the crazy thing is that the video I watched, all it showed was the people inside that, lagoon. And so it didn't really give you the information that you needed, that it's not a very safe thing to do to get into and out of the lagoon.
Oh, okay.
It can be very difficult depending on, the conditions of the water that day. If it's, um, the tide is low, then you're probably
Mm,
good.
mm.
But if the waves are crashing against the volcanic walls,
Oh.
then it's a little difficult. And so I went to this, of course, I had no idea about. So all I knew was that I was going to paddle into this beautiful little lagoon, and so I went to there's a kiosk that was by the beach where you could go rent your kayak. And you could either pay a guide to take you in, or you
Mm.
could paddle on your own. Well, I'm sort of budget conscious, and I thought, oh, I can do this by myself. I do not need a guide. It was an extra 70 New Zealand dollars, which really worked out to about 40 US. So I probably should have paid for the guide, but
Oh,
they had,
but you sound like me. I would have done the same thing.
I know, I can do it. I can do it. So, and actually, the gentleman who was renting the kayaks out, he did ask me, "Do you have any experience with the kayak?" And I said, "Yes, I have a kayak, and I live across the street from a lake. You know, but a lake is much different than
Mm-hmm.
the ocean."
Yes.
And
Yes.
he just immediately said, "Oh, you can handle it." You know, he was just convinced that just from what I had told him, I would be fine on my own. And so they sort of gave me a little tutorial, you know, about how to make sure that my kayak didn't capsize as I'm heading
My
out.
gosh. They actually said that. Oh,
Yes.
talk
And
about inciting fear in you,
I know,
right?
which made me a little nervous, but I still sort of dismissed it a little because if you just looked out at the water, it didn't look too bad, you know. But
Okay.
then as you get closer and closer to that island, you can see the water just crashing up against it, and it's not a very wide opening. It's about as wide as your kayak paddle. And so I thought, well,
Okay.
I've got to hit that just right, you know, to get in there. And I'm telling you, I was just this close to saying forget it because I was so nervous
Hmm.
about, you know, getting what if a wave comes and smashes me up against the side of that volcano? You know, I don't have a helmet on. Nobody's with me, you know, I'm by
Yeah.
myself.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I was very close to, you know, turning around. And then I
Mm.
sort of had paddled far enough up where I caught a glimpse of the inside of that lagoon. And I thought, no, I'm
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
it.
Can't pass that up.
Yeah. So I waited, I actually watched the water for quite a while, and I could see that there would be, you know, several crashes of waves, and then there would be a little bit of calm. And
Mm.
that was a pattern I noticed, and so I thought, "Okay, if I can time it just right, and I can catch that little calm stretch of time, I can get into that lagoon." And that's what I did. You know, I waited for my moment, and when I saw it, I just paddled, you know, paddled away and made just as I get into the opening, a wave comes up, but it just sort of lifts me up and carries me right into
Inside.
the yes. And so I came in a little fast and there were people in there and I might have crashed into somebody's kayak, but it was okay. They were nice. They were okay about it, but and they understood.
Oh,
Yeah. But it was
that's
magical, you know, it was I at that point, I did wish that I had, you know, somebody there with me, you know, and I wanted a picture of myself in that lagoon, and
oh,
there was a guide in there who had guided, a couple in, and he said, "If you will hand me your phone, I'll take a picture of you." And he did, but
oh.
I was so nervous to hand him my phone because I thought if this
Where's he
phone
gonna go though? I mean, that's something you're like you're in
no, no,
this.
no, I was worried I was gonna drop it. I was
Oh,
worried I was
okay.
gonna drop it in the water and then it would just be gone, you know, so I just held on to it with 2 hands and handed it to him, and he
Yeah.
was so sweet. He backed up in his kayak and took a few pictures of me, so I do have a picture of me in there.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's my
Oh,
screensaver now. It's my favorite picture of the
oh,
trip.
oh, great. Now, how
Yeah.
many people could fit inside like that
Well, so when I
donut
got in
hole?
there not very many. When I got
Yeah.
in there, there were 2 people who sort of were on their way out. You know, once I got inside, they were on their way out. And then, there was a guide and 2 other people.
Okay.
So for a minute, there were 6 of us,
Mm-hmm.
and then 2 left, and
Okay.
I thought,
Yeah.
okay, and then I got scared to go out, you know, because
Oh,
you had the same issue going out, and so I looked at the guide and I said, "How long are you guys gonna be in here?" And he said,
I would have done the same thing.
"I
Just
wanna go
followed them
out
out,
when"
right?
yes, "I wanna go out when you go out." And he said, "Oh, we're gonna be in here for a while." And I said, "Okay."
Wow.
So he sensed immediately what I was getting at,
I'm
and
sure, yes, and he
he
wasn't
said,
getting paid for
"Listen."
your time, right?
Yes. Well, yeah, and they do this special thing where they, do this, traditional tea time with if you pay for the guide, you know, they have all
Oh,
these extras
okay.
that come with it, and I think they were sort of wanting to do that in there, and so I said, "Well." I was just going to follow you out. And he said, here's what you do. He knew I was nervous to go out of the
Okay.
cave. And he said, I want you to, wait till you see that calm moment, just like you did on the way in. And then when you do, paddle as hard as you can. He said, you're going to make a right hand turn, but don't turn too quickly because then a wave can catch you and
And
push you back
push you
into.
against, yeah.
So
Okay.
he did give me a push, and he said, paddle for quite a while straight out. And then once you feel like you have enough room, then make a right and head back towards the beach. So that's what I did. And it
That
was fun.
was that was nice of him. Oh my
I know.
gosh.
I was so glad that I had done it though. And I really I'm glad that I did not know about the danger of trying to get in and out of that cave because I probably would not have done it, if I didn't know ahead of time.
I guess in some instances, ignorance is bliss,
Yeah.
but, you know, that's I'm glad you did it, honestly. Again, you conquered some fears
Yes.
unbeknownst to you, honestly, right?
Yes. And I would definitely recommend it, but I would recommend paying that extra $40 for anyone who's going. It is worth it to have someone with you that just sort of knows the right timing and,
Yes.
can give you all the, confidence that you need to get in there.
Perfect. I love that advice because that's actually segued to my next question is like, with your trip to New Zealand, what would you do differently? Would you do anything differently?
Um, I don't know if I'd do anything. May have ventured out a little from that Coromandel Peninsula. There is another place called the Bay of Islands, which is further north. And I
Mm,
guess you would say it was probably more northwest of Auckland, whereas the Coromandel
okay.
is northeast. And I really wanted to go there. They say that you can spot dolphins pretty easily from the
Uh,
beaches there. And if I had it to do over, I probably would spend some time in the Coromandel and then head to that Bay of Islands and spend some time there. But it is a more remote area, and so that sort of scared me away a little bit. I
mm,
thought, oh, I'm already a little nervous about being by myself, and
yeah.
this area looks very remote. But after being there and seeing it and seeing how the people are so welcoming and you know, nobody's really paying attention to you,
Yeah,
like
it's true.
they're kind of going through their own lives and
Yes.
if you're there, great, and if you're not, they don't really notice either way. So if I had it to do over, I would probably go to that Bay of Islands because when I got back, one of my friends came up to me and said, "Oh, I saw your pictures on Instagram. You went to New Zealand. Did you go to the Bay of Islands?" That was the first thing out of her mouth. I went, "No, I didn't, but I'll go next time."
Next time,
Yeah,
right? And you
yeah,
sounds like as you recommended that, maybe allowing more time,
yes.
if you plan to see, both parts of the island, the north and the south part. But even just in general, I mean, it sounds like you could have also just spent a few more days in the north part of the island, the northern island part.
Oh, definitely. There's so
Yeah.
much I didn't see.
Yeah.
I think the whole West Coast is a whole different look.
Mm,
And I would have loved to have gone over there. There's also a very famous, place inland where they filmed some of Lord of the Rings, and so I probably would have made that stop. A lot of people ask me if I went there, and I'm not a big Lord of the Rings fan, so I didn't carve out the time for that. But it
yeah.
did look neat. I did hear people say, whether you are or are not a fan, this is a cool little place to go. I think it's called Hobbit Town.
Oh my gosh, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, it's funny.
So, I'm sure there's many, many places, and there was a macadamia farm, that macadamia
Oh,
nut farm that I was
wow.
right next to, and I didn't know anything about it, and as I was leaving, I was reading a little book on where I was, and I went, "Oh my gosh, I was right next to that." There's so much to do and see, and,
There is.
it's just
Absolutely.
impossible to see it all, but
No, you can't.
yeah. But I did make a good effort at it and
Yes.
still had a good time. I did a lot of hiking. I saw a lot of beaches. There was a really cool beach called New Chums Beach, and the only way that you could get there was either to hike in or to boat in. And
Mm.
so the Airbnb host that I had at the first stop recommended it. They had a little book of recommended walks, as I say in air quotes,
Walks, yes,
walks,
not hikes.
not hikes. And that was one of them. And I had heard a little something about it before I left, but I thought it was going to be a lot further away than where I was. And it
Mm.
actually wasn't, it was only about a 30-minute drive away. So I thought I'm gonna do that. And that was really awesome because it was hard to get to, and it was just the most beautiful, secluded beach. And so I probably spent 2 hours there, and there was never more than 12 other people on that beach. It was
Oh, that
just
sounds
amazing.
lovely.
Yes, it was. It was. I brought a picnic with me and my knitting. I'm a knitter, so
Okay,
I was just
awesome.
as happy as I could be.
Oh my gosh. So, I mean, it sounds like you would be up for doing another solo trip.
Absolutely, Cheryl. I
Yes.
mean, when I got back, I felt so accomplished. I
Yes.
felt just sort of liberated. It was just now I can go on these trips by myself. And of course I'm gonna choose, somewhere that is safe.
Hmm. Yeah,
Like, I
absolutely.
love your shows that you do on just suggestions on where to go. Those are my favorite ones because it gives you ideas on areas that are safe for solo female travelers, and,
Mhm.
I've got them on my list now,
Yeah,
and I
yes,
know
yeah.
that I can do it. I mean, New Zealand was absolutely perfect for me because it's an English-speaking country, and
Correct.
also it had all the things I love, water,
Mhm.
hiking, good food, nice
Yes.
people. I was happy.
Yes, I've heard all that about New Zealand and Australia as well, like
Mhm.
how wonderful it is, the people, lots to do, like
Yeah,
lots of different, like you said, you experienced or could have, seen different environments, had you gone maybe south, but so much to do. I love that you came back feeling so accomplished because that's really, that's one of the reasons I advocate for solo travel, right? Because I want women to have the confidence to go, obviously. But,
yeah,
and you mentioned freedom, use the word freedom. It's one of my words I feel when I do solo travel as well. So, you know, I'm so impressed because that was a huge step for you to take, such courage. And I'm hoping that what you've shared today has really inspired other women because we have a real life story about you going
yeah.
for your very first solo trip internationally, I might add, right? And I also want to add folks that Leigh is married, as she mentioned before, so you don't have to be single to do a solo trip. And for her, it was just, she advocated to go. So she had to, pitch that to her husband and other probably friends or family. And she picked a good safe place, so
Yeah,
she did her
yeah,
research. And so look, she is a testimony of just how amazing a solo trip could be. And
yeah.
even though you got a little scared there with the kayaking thing, you overcame that. And look at the beauty that you saw. I mean, I'm gonna have to have you send me one of those pictures of you
Oh, yeah.
in the volcano because I haven't seen it. That would be amazing.
Yes.
Um, so any other like tips since you've done your first solo trip? What is there anything you wish you knew beforehand that you kind of have figured out now?
Um, I think I will say, and the fact that you brought up the point that I'm married, I'm married to a very capable person, and he's one of those guys that can fix anything and anything that breaks, whether it's your computer or your washing machine or your car breaks down. And so we've been married for over 20 years, and I felt like I had lost some of my independence almost a
Mm-hmm.
little because the kids and we all defer to dad. If something breaks, dad can fix it, and he's always the driver when we go
Go
out of the
away. Mhm.
go on a trip, he's always the driver, and so, for me, it was regaining some of that.
I love
I
that.
didn't realize how much I relied on him, until I was by myself, and that's really I lived by myself for 8 years before we got married, and so, when you're by yourself, you have to do everything yourself. You don't
Correct.
have
Yes.
anyone else to do that stuff for you. And so that was difficult for me at first. And, and I even shot him a text and said, one thing I've learned is that I take you for granted and that I rely on
Oh.
you too much. And so it's good for you, even if you are married, to have this time apart where you can sort of, appreciate each other and appreciate your family. Because when you're all together all the time, you sort of take each other for granted. So that sort of surprised me.
I love that nugget of wisdom. And it reminded me that there's actually, I don't know if it's some sort of research they've done, but couples that it can relate to travel, but couples that have their own sort of maybe an activity that they do by themselves are have healthier marriages. Like
Yes,
they just
I
when they
heard that.
have that time, whether like you said, whether it's like I'm gonna take a trip, maybe they take a trip or they do something else, or they have their guy friends, you have your girlfriends. So I believe that's what you've just experienced is also gonna potentially, like you said, gives you an appreciation for your husband, right? I love
Yes.
it. Love it. Yeah.
But I do have 2 tips for your
Okay.
listeners.
Yes, please.
Okay, and they're pretty basic, but if you're by yourself, are you nervous about being by yourself somewhere? I always walk with purpose. Do you know what I mean
Mhm.
by that?
Yes,
So don't
absolutely.
don't be aloof, don't be on your phone, don't look
Hmm.
like you're lost, you know?
Correct.
Look like you know where you're going and you know what you're doing, because those people are much less likely to be bothered by someone else or to be approached by someone else. And then the other thing is, when I was 18 and my older brother, Ben, he's 6 years older than me, and I was about to leave to go to college. Shout out to another Texan, Ben. Leigh.
Oh, hey, yay.
But he had come home for my high school graduation, and so he wanted to give me a piece of advice, and I've taken it with me my whole life. And he's
Mm,
very short but wise piece of advice. Leigh, don't ever put yourself in a stupid situation. And I'm gonna put a little spin on it for
okay,
the
please.
adult. Don't ever put yourself in an unsafe situation. So if you have a feeling, especially women, they have this intuition. If you feel like maybe you shouldn't walk down that street, then maybe you shouldn't walk down that street. Listen to
Yes,
your inner voice and just sort of have common sense when you travel.
I love it. How true. It's kind of my motto too. So oh, yes, I love it. Well, Leigh, this has been fabulous. It's been very encouraging, enlightening. I have to, I guess I need to put New Zealand on my list. I mean,
Oh, definitely.
so I have a top 10 list.
Mhm.
And since I'll be able to cross one of those off, I'll have to add New Zealand in
Yeah,
there now. So now I'll still have 10, but
for sure,
it's
for
always
sure.
shifting and changing, but yes.
Oh,
So,
yeah, same with me.
so
But, that's good. That'll just give us more trips to go on.
Exactly. I love it. And I'm really hoping your story encourages other women to do the same, to get out there, take that leap, and just, do that solo trip, especially if they haven't yet. I love it. Thank you so much for your, also your wisdom and everything that you shared here today. I think it's
You're welcome.
definitely, worthy of, just everybody listening. I'm so thrilled. Thank you for being on my show.
Of course. Thanks for having me on. I had a blast.
Oh, awesome.